Hello, this is Joel Tyler Rogers from Com 616 and just wrapping up our final presentation for our paper. And what I went into for this study was the ethics of coaching and why this is so important. It's something I'm passionate about. I'm actually a coach myself, not at the collegiate level. But I do coach a swim team at Lifetime Fitness. I've coached the last like 5 years at some very high end club level swim teams, and so it's just something I'm passionate about. So I wanted to kind of dive into a little deeper. So going forward, let's see if this works. There we go. So for my abstract, I'm pretty much, or before go into this, I'm going to just go through each section of my paper and hopefully it all ties together and hopefully you really enjoy this presentation and get to learn a little bit about what I believe deals with the ethics of coaching and how they should be ethically responsible to certain things that I'll discuss in this. So for my abstract, I stated I'm a captain on the men's triathlon team at our school. Most team members I've noticed, and I've been on a lot of teams, like in undergrad, I transferred a few times. I was on a swim team, I was on a track team, I was on a triathlon team, and now I'm on another triathlon team. So I have a lot of team experience. And one thing I've noticed is most team members often want to have their voice heard, whether they're the fastest on the team or the slowest. They want their voice heard. And specifically, now I deal with the endurance sport. So with a training philosophy, of what they personally believe will make them the best athlete. But this could be applied to team sports as well. Any sport. Rather like in basketball, if they think they should focus more on offense than defense, or football, focus more on tackling than always conditioning or something like that. There's always different opinions. So as a result, this study I use the dialogic learning model, as well as the interpersonal responsibility to dive into the ethical responsibility that comes with being a coach. And I thought these two fit pretty perfectly into this paper. In my findings, so some members on the team, so this was pretty much my case. Some members on the team did not completely agree with Coach Dyer, that's my coach, with his training philosophy this year. So a meeting was hosted with the captains because I put in my paper, like the captains went up and told them like, hey, not everyone agrees with what we're doing. And Coach Dyer was awesome and was like, okay, let's have a meeting with the captains because he trusts their feedback. They've been in the sport, they're experienced, they know how to train, they know how to work. So we all had a meeting together. He told us to be prepared to discuss ideas. And so we get in there and different ideas were tossed back and forth with the pros and cons of each strategy discussed in great detail. It was like a 2-hour meeting. And a very key part of this discussion was that no idea was seen as a bad idea. Then this just helped encourage dialogue. It helped just everyone, like if some captains are more shy than others, to be able to just stand out and say what they personally believe, and then we kind of just tossed them all back and forth. And Coach Dyer also mentioned that he had promised some of the new members they would help them stay injury free during the season. That's why they had left other universities due to overtraining in the past. So this was a promise given out, and he wanted to honor this promise. So he was very careful to not have a major, like, big, heavy workload. But he thought we could get a lot of work done efficiently, but without making it like you were training 7 hours a day. So in the discussion, my paper showed how collegiate coaches should move the focus from the relationship alone to responsibility for the relationship with their athletes. And by moving to the responsibility of the relationship, it ensures these coaches will not make false promises to athletes in recruiting. A big scandal going on just in the news, and I found some support of this in my paper, is coaches will like make these big promises, especially in football and basketball, the two higher money sports. And they'll promise them like, oh, you'll be playing, you'll be starting, da 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 da. We'll treat you like royalty, and they spoil them in recruiting. Like they give them like legally, like what they could give them. They fly them out. There was one case, coach flew a kid out on a private jet. And then like, but once you get there, they're like, oh, sorry, I did this to everyone. And, only in football, only 11 guys are starting on each side of the field. So, um, a bunch of guys don't get that promise lived out, and then they get broken or they want to transfer. So this was a big emphasis on my paper, focusing on um, the responsibility for the relationship. And I noticed Coach Dyer used the dialogic learning model when discussing the training plan with the captains. This a way he did this was by meeting and understanding various communication contexts and applications. So he brought in all the captains. We had various strategies and communication things. Everybody was coming in with a different context, different ideas, different beliefs in regards to training. And so by asking the athletes to meet with him, he started to build trust with us as the captains, but also our team, because our team knew, hey, the captain's voice is getting heard, which means the team's voice is getting heard. And then Coach Dyer, he then had an environment of temporal dialogic ethical competence, which had both the captains and Coach Dyer himself learning from each other. Like, man, my coach, I think he's awesome. He really was willing to listen. And like, I think as much as we learned from him, he learned from us as well. Like in the end, he has the say on training. In the end, it comes down on him. It is his job. He's above us in authority. But I think we both learned from each other. So that went in alignment with that theory, to help assist our team going forward. So going to the conclusion, and these are very brief summaries to keep this not a 30-minute presentation. But in conclusion, according to the dialogic learning model, Coach Dyer was able to actively listen to the captains, which is a big part, without demand, and engage with them by communicating and negotiating new possibilities in regards to training the captains had not previously thought of. According to the other theory I applied, interpersonal responsibility, Coach Dyer had a responsibility for his relationship with his athletes, and this was due to his power and resources as being their coach, and promises he had made from recruiting them. And so this study really showed how he personally took this responsibility very seriously in order to continually develop the athlete's trust, to continue having communication dialogue, and to personally develop all the athletes, regardless of if they're a scorer or not, beyond just their physical training, but more prepare them for life after sports end. So then, in recommendations based on this, in reference to all collegiate coaches, I believe they must be able to actively listen and understand various contexts coming from their athletes. Otherwise, teams are so diverse, or they should be. I hope they are, collegiately, that like if you cannot understand various contexts, like you're going to struggle as a collegiate coach. Like that's just a fact. And so one way to understand this is to have constant communication and trust, personally, with all your athletes. And this just will create a culture of where people communicate, they trust each other, and it's an easier way to understand each other, especially if the athlete's going through a rough time. Another recommendation from the study to collegiate coaches deals with the importance of interpersonal responsibility. And with this, the recommendation is that many college students transition into a new phase. They're moving away from home. They're no longer with their parents. The students, if they're blessed enough to be a student athlete, they're looking to their coach as a guide or a mentor or like a second parent, like a family member, at least until the coach, gives them a reason not to. So because of this, I recommended that, coaches really take the interpersonal responsibility seriously. Because if not, it could really send these students, especially the freshman ones, they're on thin ice. And if they're missing home, they're homesick, they might be a little anxious or depressed. And if a coach handles this wrong, that could spiral out of control very quickly. Going to implications. Sorry about that. So my implication section, I noticed pretty much, if these aren't done correctly, coaches should be fired. I know that sounds harsh, but it's like if you're just trying to win games only and you're not preparing people for future, like even let's say they do go pro, they're going to probably be done with their sport in most sports by age 35 to 40. And then they're gonna have to work in the workforce, unless if they were blessed with millions of dollars and are the top 0.1%. Every other student athlete, they're gonna have to work someday, and most of them a lot sooner than later. And so, if coaches are just teaching them to only win and not preparing them for the future, not handling things ethically, I believe they should be fired. And so I went into that a little bit. I put also how if these situations change due to the recommendations of the study, student athletes will cope with stress much better from being away from home. They have a higher chance of becoming leaders in life after sports, and they will always have someone outside of their family who they can talk to and trust to when life gets difficult. The cool thing about a great coach, at least in my personal experience and from other athletes I've heard, is there's so many stories like your coach who you really trusted, they called that coach 20 years later and the coach still gave them great advice. And I think that's the ethical responsibility that coaches have. So going into suggestions for further research, others can elaborate on this study and go into research even further on the effects of these suggested strategies in different contexts and cultures. Obviously, what works for one team is not going to work necessarily exactly the same way for another team because teams are so different. They have different cultures. I mean, even different sports are just bringing different cultures. So I'd really like to see this study like expand and see like would this same approach work for like men's football team or like a women's lacrosse team because the sports are just very different sports. Or like a smaller team like a women's gymnastics team. It would just be interesting to see how that would apply. So that could be some further research. And building upon this study will help sharpen and direct the suggested strategies and will give coaches just a toolbox to carry around of ethical strategies that they could use depending on the scenario their team is dealing with. So they don't always have to use this, but if a situation comes up, then they'll at least have a toolbox to be prepared to handle that situation. So overall, these are my references. I found this paper to be really fun to write. It's always easy to write about something you're passionate about, and this was actually a case applied to me personally. I was one of those captains in that meeting, so that's how I knew all the information. And I just hope you learned a little bit about the ethical responsibility of coaches, and I hope coaches, in light of some negative news press in regards to recruiting and stuff, that they begin to take their ethical responsibility seriously going forward at all D1, D2, D3, all NCAA, or all just college institutions. So I'm Tyler Rogers, and I hope you enjoyed this.